In this scene, two Venezuelan Air Force F-16 jets flew almost directly over the U.S. ship Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer of the U.S. Navy, equipped with guided missile systems.
When the radar of a U.S. Navy destroyer blares an incoming threat alert, every person on board knows what it means. Enemy aircraft are closing in. That night, the USS Jason Dunham detected two Venezuelan F-16s heading straight toward it at attack speed. Within seconds, alarms sounded, weapons locked, and orders were shouted across the deck. What happened next wasn't a drill. It was a real encounter that nearly ignited a war in the Caribbean and changed military policy overnight. The brewing storm. When you think of the Caribbean, you're probably thinking of calm blue water, sunny beaches, and vacation. But by October 2025, this paradise was feeling less like a resort and more like a powder keg. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for a single spark to set everything off. This is the story of how we got to the brink. It all started with a war you might not have even heard about. It wasn't a war against a country, at least not officially. The United States called it a counter-narcotics operation.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country.
But they used some very powerful words to describe it. They labeled it a non-international armed conflict. Now, that's a complicated phrase.
If you reframe how you understand the world in our own hemisphere, that's exactly what these foreign terrorist organizations are. And so we will track them, we will map them, we will network them, and we will hunt them and kill them.
But what it really meant was this. The U.S. government was giving itself the legal green light to use its military might, just like it would in a war zone, to hunt down drug smugglers. American officials didn't mince words. They accused Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro of being the head of a narco-terrorist regime. They claimed his government wasn't just turning a blind eye to drug trafficking. They alleged it was a central part of the operation, using illegal drugs as a weapon against the United States. You don't make an accusation like that and just walk away. The response was a massive show of force. The U.S. began moving warships and aircraft into the Caribbean in what became the largest military buildup in Latin America in decades. It was a floating fortress of American power parked just off the coast. This wasn't a subtle diplomatic message. This was a blunt, unmistakable warning. But a warning can easily be seen as a threat. From the perspective of Venezuela, this was an outright act of aggression. Here was their historical superpower rival massing its navy right on their doorstep. They saw it as an illegal military operation, a violation of their sovereignty, and a direct threat to their nation. The tension didn't stay theoretical. Things got real, and they got deadly. U.S. warships and patrol aircraft began tracking vessels they suspected of carrying drugs. And they didn't just intercept them. In a series of strikes, they opened fire. Ships were blown up. People died. The U.S. called it a successful counter-narcotics strike, but in Venezuela they called it something else entirely: illegal massacres. The Venezuelan government condemned these actions in the strongest possible terms. Each explosion on the water, each announcement from Washington, poured gasoline on the fire of distrust and hatred between the two nations. So, picture the scene. You have one side, the United States, convinced it is fighting a just war against narco-terrorists. You have the other side, Venezuela, convinced it is facing an imperialist attack from a foreign power. And in the middle, the beautiful Caribbean Sea is now the world's most volatile chessboard. American sailors were on high alert. Venezuelan forces were watching every move. The stage was set. The players were in position. All the ingredients for a disaster were mixed together and waiting. It was a tinderbox, a brewing storm of accusations, warships, and gunfire. And all it would take was one mistake, one miscommunication, one reckless act for the entire situation to explode. The calm was an illusion. The storm was coming. A sentinel in contested waters. So into this tinderbox sails a floating fortress of American power, the USS Jason Dunham. This was not just any ship. It was an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, one of the most powerful and advanced warships ever to sail the seas. Its name, Jason Dunham, honors a Marine who gave his life for his comrades. a name that carries the weight of ultimate sacrifice. And in the tense autumn of 2025, this ship was tasked with a mission that required both immense power and incredible restraint. The Dunham was never alone. It was a key player in a significant U.S. naval task force, a team of hunters operating together. This group included other powerful destroyers like the USS Stockdale and the USS Gravely, and lurking beneath the waves, silent and unseen, was perhaps the most potent member of the team, a nuclear-powered submarine. This was not a casual patrol. This was a coordinated show of overwhelming force. But what made the Jason Dunham so special? It all comes down to its brain and its fists. Its brain is called the Aegis Combat System. Think of Aegis as the most powerful gaming computer and radar system you can imagine, all stuffed into a single ship. It can see hundreds of targets at once, from aircraft skimming the waves to missiles screaming through the stratosphere. It can track them, analyze the threat, and if necessary, engage them, all in the blink of an eye. This system turns the ship into a guardian, a digital sentinel with unparalleled awareness. Then you have its fists. Packed into the center of the ship is the Mark 41 vertical launch system. It sounds technical, but it's essentially a vast magazine of over 90 ready-to-fire missiles. This isn't just one type of weapon, it's a whole toolbox for different problems. Need to swat a fast-moving jet out of the sky? It has standard missiles for that. Need to destroy a target hundreds of miles inland? It can launch a Tomahawk cruise missile, a weapon that can fly over the horizon and hit a specific window pane. And for up-close threats, it has the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, a radar-guided Gatling gun that can spew out thousands of rounds a minute to create a literal wall of steel against anything that gets too close. This technological fortress had a very clear and very dangerous mission. It was tasked with patrolling some of the most vital oil shipping routes on the planet, corridors that carried millions of barrels of crude oil every day, fueling half a hemisphere. Its job was to be a visible symbol of American commitment and power, ensuring these lanes stayed open. But its other mission was the one that put it directly in the crosshairs. The Jason Dunham was there to enforce the U.S.'s aggressive counter-narcotics operations. It was the tip of the spear in that non-international armed conflict. This meant its powerful radars were constantly scanning, not just for military threats, but for the small, fast boats used by drug smugglers. It was this very mission that had already led to deadly strikes and soaring tensions. So there it was. The USS Jason Dunham, a $2 billion masterpiece of technology and warfighting, a ship designed to dominate the seas, was now a solitary sentinel cruising back and forth in the contested waters off Venezuela's coast. For the 300-plus sailors on board, life was a constant state of high alert. They were far from home, operating in a place where they were seen not as guardians, but as invaders. They knew that every blip on their radar, every small plane that appeared on the horizon could be the spark that ignited the storm. They were holding the line, a line that was getting thinner and more dangerous with every passing day. A fading echo of American friendship. Now, what challenges a billion-dollar sentinel like the USS Jason Dunham? The answer came from the sky, but not in the form you might expect. It wasn't a state-of-the-art stealth fighter, it was a ghost. A fading echo from a time when America and Venezuela were actually friends. It was the Venezuelan F-16, and that is the deepest layer of irony in this entire confrontation. These very same F-16s were once a symbol of partnership. Venezuela was an American ally. The United States happily sold them a fleet of F-16A and B models, specifically the Block 15 variant. These were good jets for their time, a sign of trust and mutual interest. Venezuela's pilots trained with the U.S., learned American tactics, and flew American machines. It was a completely different world, but time moves on and friendships can sour. Over the decades, as relations between Washington and Caracas deteriorated, that fleet of F-16s began to tell a story of neglect and isolation. The once proud jets became relics. Without a steady supply of parts and support from the United States, keeping them flying became a monumental task. Out of the original 24, only a handful, perhaps as few as 6 or 7, were still considered airworthy by 2025. These jets were the survivors, kept alive with cannibalized parts, ingenuity, and sheer willpower. They weren't just few in number, they were trapped in the past. While modern fighter jets can lock onto and destroy an enemy from dozens of miles away with beyond visual range missiles, Venezuela's F-16s lacked that punch. Their most advanced air-to-air weapons were older AIM-9L and AIM-9P Sidewinder missiles. These are heat-seeking missiles, designed for a close-range dogfight, where the pilot can literally see the whites of the enemy pilot's eyes. They are a weapon from a bygone era of air combat. This is what makes their choice so telling. Venezuela wasn't without more modern options. In the 2000s, they had turned to Russia and purchased a fleet of powerful long-range Su-30 Mk2 flanker fighters. These jets are massive, formidable, and carry advanced missiles that can engage targets from much, much farther away. They are a genuine regional threat. So, why send the old, tired F-16s against the most advanced U.S. warship afloat? Why not send their best? The answer lies in the delicate, dangerous game of messaging. Sending the Su-30s with their long-range radar and missiles could have been interpreted as an immediate lethal threat. It might have forced the Jason Dunham to make a split-second catastrophic decision. The old F-16s, however, were a different kind of symbol. Their flight was a calculated, highly provocative act, but one born more of desperation and political theater than a genuine desire for a shooting war. It was a show of force using the very jets the Americans had given them. It was a defiant statement. We are still here, we can still fly, and we will not be intimidated in our own backyard. Using these relics was a way to challenge their former supplier and patron without crossing the absolute red line that would trigger an all-out war. It was a gamble, a dangerous piece of political theater performed with aging equipment. For the Venezuelan pilots climbing into those cockpits, the reality was stark. They were flying jets that were older than they were, with limited capabilities, against a warship that could see them from hundreds of miles away and swat them from the sky without them ever knowing what happened. They were brave, no doubt, but they were also sent on a mission with one hand tied behind their back, pilots in outdated jets becoming pawns in a high-stakes game of national pride. They were the fading echo, sent to shout at a thunderstorm. And everyone was about to find out what would happen when that echo reached the wall of the storm itself. The dawn, no one saw. In the profound darkness that precedes the Caribbean dawn, the world felt asleep. The only light came from a sliver of moon and the steady, purposeful glow of the USS Jason Dunham as it carved a silent path through the water. This was not just a ship, it was a floating city of steel and will, a sentinel tasked with guarding the arteries of global energy. Millions of barrels of oil flowed along this route every day, and the 317 men and women aboard the Dunham were the silent guardians, ensuring that flow never stopped. For them, the early hours of October 28, 2025, were meant to be a monument to routine. Then, deep within the ship's heart, in the dim blue light of the Combat Information Center, a single radar screen flared to life. This was not a ghost echo or a weather anomaly. It was a signal. It was small, broken, and low to the water, but it was moving with a purpose that was undeniably hostile. The shape was unmistakable to their expert eyes, fighter jets, and they were coming in fast from the north, a direction that pointed to a known and often unfriendly power. The calm on the ship shattered in a heartbeat. The identity of the incoming jets was confirmed. They were Venezuelan F-16s, older models but still deadly. This was not a lost patrol or a navigational error. The jets ignored every radio call, every attempt to ask their intentions. Instead of veering away, they accelerated, their speed pushing past 500 knots as they aimed directly for the destroyer. The ship's captain did not hesitate. The order Condition 2 rang out, and the Dunham transformed. It was like watching a sleeping dragon awaken. Hatches slammed shut, sealing the ship into a series of watertight compartments. On the decks, sailors manned powerful guns, their eyes scanning the horizon for a visual. Below in the high-tech nerve center, fingers danced across keyboards, bringing weapons systems online. The final line of defense, the Phalanx Close-In Weapons System, spun its 6 barrels with a low electric whine, a sound that promised a storm of metal. The 2 enemy jets split their formation, one diving low and the other climbing high, a classic pincer attack designed to overwhelm defenses. It was a tactic from a bygone era, but in the right circumstances, it could still be deadly. Then the night sky was torn open by the launch of 2 missiles. The lead F-16 had fired first. The AIM-9L Sidewinders, vintage weapons from the 1980s, streaked toward the Dunham. Each missile was a relatively simple device, built to find the intense heat of a jet engine and cost less than a luxury car. But aimed at a billion-dollar warship, they were a spark thrown at a powder keg. For a heart-stopping second, they raced forward. But their simple technology was their downfall. The Dunham did not present the blazing heat signature the missiles sought. Confused and blind, the projectiles wavered, lost their lock, and carved useless, chaotic arcs into the dark sea before plunging into the water. The response from the American destroyer was not just swift, it was instantaneous. Its Aegis combat system, a digital brain of unimaginable speed, had tracked the launch and calculated a dozen countermeasures before most of the crew had even processed the visual of the missile trails. The phalanx gun thundered, not at the jets but into the space between, firing 4,500 rounds per minute to create an impassable wall of tungsten steel. It was a final, deafening warning. The F-16 pilots, their radar warning receivers screaming in their ears, wrenched their controls, twisting violently to avoid the lethal curtain. They were now on the defensive, their reckless attack having failed utterly. The crew of the Dunham watched, every sense heightened. The captain's voice was calm but iron-hard over the internal comms. They had been fired upon. The rules of engagement were now clear. The next order would not be to defend. It would be to eliminate. The silent aftermath and the global storm. The command that followed was brief, just 3 words transmitted over a secured, encrypted channel. Weapons free, engage. With those words, the USS Jason Dunham ceased to be a defensive guardian and became an instrument of decisive judgment. What happened next was a display of modern warfare so rapid and brutal it was almost clinical. From the deck of the destroyer, the covers of the Mk-41 vertical launch system blew open with a metallic roar. Inside were rows of missiles, standing like soldiers at attention. 4 of them, RIM 174 Standard Missile 6 interceptors, ignited and launched into the sky. They climbed at an impossible speed, Mach 3.5, tearing through the air like molten spears. At the same time, 2 FA-18E Super Hornets, which had been vectored into the area from a nearby carrier group, swept in from a higher altitude, their own systems locking onto the now fleeing F-16s. The Venezuelan pilots saw the incoming threats on their scopes far too late. Their cockpits were instantly flooded with the panicked, screaming alerts of their radar warning systems. They pulled back on their sticks, trying to climb, to dive, to do anything to escape. But physics and technology had already sealed their fate. The first American missile found its target. It did not need a direct hit. It was designed to explode near its target, showering it with a cloud of metal fragments burning hotter than 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. This cloud ripped into the first F-16, shredding its wing and severing its hydraulic lines. The jet instantly lost control, tumbling out of the sky in a violent, smoking death spiral. The second F-16 pilot tried to fight back, activating an old jamming pod to try and confuse the Dunham's radar. It was a futile gesture. The destroyer's advanced electronic warfare suite not only neutralized the jamming but reflected it back, overloading the jet's own systems. The cockpit lights flickered and died. A total systems failure. A sailor on the Dunham calmly reported, "Target 2 losing altitude." In less than 60 seconds, the 2 radar blips that had caused so much tension simply vanished from the screens. The entire engagement, from the first hostile radar contact to the final splash, was over. The ocean, as it always does, smoothed over the violence, leaving only a fading stain of fuel and debris. An armada responds. The game of chicken was over. Now it was time to show the entire chessboard. The response was swift and breathtaking in its scale. The single sentinel, the USS Jason Dunham, was not going to be left alone. It was about to become the lead ship in an armada. The United States Navy made a move that shook the entire region. They deployed the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group. To understand the message, you have to understand the messenger. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not just another ship. It is the world's largest and most advanced aircraft carrier. It is a floating capital city of American military power. Its arrival in the Caribbean changed everything. This was no longer a counter-narcotics operation. This was a full-scale demonstration of global reach. The Ford did not travel alone. Surrounding it was a protective screen of warships, including other Arleigh Burke-class destroyers just like the Jason Dunham. These escort ships are powerful weapons in their own right, carrying hundreds of vertical launch missiles. These missiles aren't just for hitting aircraft. They are Tomahawk cruise missiles, weapons that can strike targets with pinpoint accuracy over 1,000 miles away. This meant that from their position at sea, the U.S. could hold virtually any target in the region at risk. But the real power of the Ford lies on its flight deck. It carries an entire air force of over 60 aircraft. This includes squadrons of F/A-18 Super Hornets, versatile fighter jets that can dominate the skies. The arrival of these jets meant that the United States now owned the air over the Caribbean. Any future encounter would not be between two old F-16s and a single destroyer. It would be between those aging jets and the full might of a carrier air wing. And as if that wasn't enough, the United States made another powerful move on the strategic chessboard. They forward-deployed U.S. Marine Corps F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters to Puerto Rico. The F-35 is a fifth-generation stealth fighter. It is virtually invisible to older radar systems, like the ones Venezuela would have used. This deployment was a direct and unmistakable response to the F-16 flyover. It was a silent warning, a ghost at the wedding. This massive buildup was the very definition of escalation. It was a clear show of force, designed to be seen by every military analyst and every government in the hemisphere. The message was simple and brutal. The United States does not de-escalate when challenged, it escalates. It brings more power, more technology, and more determination to the fight. The solitary sentinel was now part of an unbreakable wall. The Jason Dunham's powerful radar was now just one node in a vast networked web of sensors that included the carrier's own radars, its Hawkeye early warning aircraft, and the stealthy sensors of the F-35s. Nothing could move in the air or on the sea without them knowing. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been completely reset. The initial provocation, the flyover, was meant to test American resolve. The response, the arrival of the Ford Strike Group, was the answer. It was a verdict delivered in steel, jet fuel, and overwhelming firepower. The question was no longer what the Venezuelan jets might do. The question now was whether anyone would dare to challenge this assembled power. The Caribbean had just become the most heavily patrolled, most intensely watched body of water in the world, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. When the wreckage of the two Venezuelan jets hit the water, the sea swallowed everything within minutes. There were no floating wings, no parachutes, and no emergency beacons. The debris sank fast, leaving almost nothing for satellites to spot. The USS Jason Dunham stayed on station for a short time, scanning for any signs of life or additional threats, but the radar screens stayed empty. The Navy crew logged the engagement in a sealed internal report. It was marked, "For official use only," which meant it would never reach public records. The captain knew exactly what would happen next. Incidents like this did not go to the press. They went up the chain of command and disappeared behind layered security clearances. In Caracas, Venezuelan officials received a silent, encrypted notification. 2 aircraft lost, cause unknown, pilots missing. They understood the truth immediately, but releasing it would invite national humiliation. It would also risk a confrontation their military could not sustain, so they chose the only path that avoided a crisis. They erased their own radar logs, shut down communications, and told the families the jets suffered instrument failure and crashed into open water. Washington made the same calculation. There was no advantage in announcing that 2 foreign jets fired on a U.S. warship. It would spike oil markets, drag the UN into another fight, and force a military response that no one wanted. The White House quietly ordered the Navy to keep the incident classified and limit all details to internal briefings. By the afternoon, neither country mentioned the encounter. There were no headlines, no statements, and no reporters digging for answers. The Caribbean stayed calm. Tankers kept moving. The world remained unaware that a full-scale international incident had almost erupted before sunrise. Both nations understood something that rarely makes the news. Sometimes the most dangerous events are the ones no one hears about. According to the internal reports that later leaked, this entire event was never supposed to reach the public. The Navy classified the shootdown immediately and locked the details inside restricted logs. If the later leaks are real, the U.S. intention was simple: handle the threat, file the report, and keep the incident buried to avoid a public crisis. Venezuela, the reports say, had the same instinct. Their military allegedly received word that 2 of their jets were missing, but instead of announcing it, they labeled the loss as an equipment failure during routine patrol. The leaked files, which included radar data, encrypted radio calls, and thermal images, paint a different picture than what anyone was told. They suggest the Venezuelan jets entered international airspace, fired first, and triggered a lawful U.S. defensive response. But none of this appeared in any news cycle at the time because both governments kept it quiet. According to the documents, the entire encounter was meant to disappear before dawn. In the end, the only record of the battle was a classified log, a silent reminder that the most dangerous conflicts are often the ones the world never learns about.